Hello everyone, and welcome to APUSH Period 4, Andrew Jackson, Nullification Crisis, and the Bank War. This is actually my first video of the 2019-2020 school year. We'll have to wait and see how many more of these I'll do. I've been using some of the older ones, as you already know. They're oldies but goodies. But here we're going to get into specifically these two events that take place in Jackson's first term, and then in his as he's getting reelected for his second term. So let's get right into this. Let's remember our key concept. Key concept 4.1, Roman number 1, letter C. Here we're speaking specifically now about Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay. Right? These newer political parties are coming, but if you remember again, they originally were all the Jeffersonian Republicans. And then we got into the era of good feelings, where the Federalist Party has gone away, but the Republican Party was in two different factions, right? The National Republicans, the Democratic Republicans. Henry Clay was the National. He was a guy who was working for internal improvement. He wanted a national bank. He wanted protective tariffs. That's part of his. Do you remember what that's called? Anybody? Oh. We all know Mr. Allen knows. Please, somebody else. Oh, yes. That's right. The American system. I knew you guys knew that. But the Democratic Republicans, right, because of states' rights, they never want the American system. They don't want the federal government involved in that. They don't like high tariffs. They don't like the bank, especially as we're going to find out Jackson don't like the bank. And this is what's going to be this massive fight between the two. Now in class, we've already talked about the election of 1824 and the corrupt bargain, right? Where Clay and Quincy Adams supposedly stole the election from the people's candidate, Andrew Jackson. Or is that all in his head? Who knows? It's debatable, I guess, either way. But the election of 1828 takes place. And Andrew Jackson wins that one solidly. Now, he ran against John Quincy Adams. Clay did not run in that one, right? Clay ran in the 24 one. As we found out, he loses spectacularly, right? But he did run in 28. Well, but if you remember, we talked about in class, there was this other guy who chose not to run for president, but he said he'd be everyone's vice president, right? You remember who that was? I know you do. I heard it. John C. Calhoun, right? So John C. Calhoun was not only John Quincy Adams' vice president, but now he's going to be Andrew Jackson's vice president, and there's going to be a problem. Let's find out what that problem is. Whoa! Whoa, I told you this guy was a werewolf. Look at that hair. Look at that glorious hair. Look at them eyes. Those steely, cold eyes. Wait till later on, I'll show you another picture where he actually has a neck beard and he really comes out like a werewolf. Well, what is this thing that's going to happen now? Jackson wins his election in 1828. And everything should be just great for him. He's the people's candidate. He is the president of the people. Well, tariffs, right? In our concept, it tells us they're going to fight over tariffs. When Quincy was still president, the Democratic Republicans pushed through Congress this high tariff, this high protective tariff, hoping that when Quincy signs it, it will hurt his chances to win re-election. It passed, but it passed toward the very end, and so really Andrew Jackson is the one who inherits this very high tariff, which the South calls the tariff of abomination. You're raising our taxes, you're cutting into our profits, you're coming after our slaves. The Vice President of the United States decides to write a pamphlet, the South Carolina Exposition. He doesn't put his name on it, but this pamphlet goes back to remember Thomas Jefferson, his Virginia Resolution, where he talked about compact theory. The 13 original states helped to create the Constitution and the federal government. Thereby, the 13 states are superior to the federal government, and they can nullify any law that they don't like, null and void it in their state. Now, it was only a resolution, right? It never passed Congress. That's 1798. Here we are now, 1828. 30 years have gone by. Calhoun brings that theory back, but he also starts to allude to the idea that the states can secede if they're pushed to the brink. Now, just 8 years earlier, 1828, 8 years earlier, 1820, the South is already angry because of the Missouri Compromise. That Missouri controversy started, where the North didn't want slaves crossing Mississippi River. All of a sudden, you get these high tariffs. Now, Calhoun does a very miscalculation here. He thinks him and Jackson are both Southern men. He and Jackson, both slave owners, both states' riders. He thinks. His big miscalculation, he didn't tell Jackson he was going to do this. He did it behind Jackson's back. That is a no-no. Jackson now sees him as an enemy.
An enemy has been slain.
Yeah. Remember, when you become Jackson's enemy, you're his enemy for life. All right? For life. He already dislikes Henry Clay. He can't stomach Quincy Adams. Now his own vice president has gone behind his back. And now there is this great standoff begins. South Carolina will stand alone. They want the federal government to capitulate, to give in, and start lowering tariffs, or else they might leave. Jackson becomes all of a sudden a nationalist. He says, I am here to defend the Union. In a lot of respects, and we're going to do this article in class that talks about Southern honor and how Southern men think about honor in a way that's very superficial. And Jackson's one of these kind of guys. For him, politics is personal, as we said. And for him, this was a slight personally against him that Calhoun has done. In fact, Calhoun becomes so afraid of Jackson that he'll start sleeping in his bed with a pistol under his pillow, because Jackson is starting to threaten that he might hang Calhoun. And we know what he did to those two British guys, right? I mean, just seriously, it's woo! You just never know. You just never know. This issue, though, will consume the 4 years of Jackson's first administration. There is going to be all kinds of tension now in the country for 4 years. On April 13th, 1830, that is the birthday of Thomas Jefferson. Now, Jefferson has passed 4 years ago. He died in 1826. But remember, famous people, they still celebrate your birthday. So all these men are gathering in Washington, D.C. And they've invited Jackson. And Jackson says, it's a nullification affair altogether. And Jackson's angry over this because they won't listen to him. But they invite him to come, and he comes. And the famous toast is given. All these men are toasting all day long to the glories of Thomas Jefferson, the glory of standing up to John Adams in 1798 over the Alien and Sedition Acts, and Jefferson's Virginia Resolution, and Madison's Kentucky Resolutions. And they're toasting and toasting. And then it's Jackson's turn. In the crowd is a guy we're going to talk about later on, Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren, a Democrat from New York, and, as we'll come to find out, the true architect, the true builder of the Democratic Party, and a loyal Jacksonian. He got up on a chair. He wanted to see what's about to happen. Jackson stands up with a glass, stares down Calhoun, and he says, the Union, it must be preserved. You can only imagine at that moment what Calhoun is thinking. Uh-oh.
An enemy has been slain.
Just about. It sure is. It's just about to happen. Calhoun eventually gets up. The Union, next to our liberties, the most dear, right? And then Jackson leaves. He's angry. In 1832, this is how this is starting to get. All this tension over this nullification crisis. South Carolina declares themselves the Palmetto State. They start having various state elections. They're thinking now of secession. Jackson orders a navy to come down. He puts a small army in Virginia. He's threatening war. It looks like the Civil War is upon us. But no southern states are going to come to South Carolina's aid. But they're also not going to, stand and side with Jackson either. It's just this crazy, total anxiety, tense-ridden moment in our history. Everyone's wondering, how is this going to end? Henry Clay, the great compromiser, right? He already helped with the compromise, the Missouri Compromise. Remember, it wasn't his compromise, but he dominated the debates. But now he comes up with a compromise tariff. He will go to Calhoun. Those two men worked together back in the War of 1812, along with a third guy, Daniel Webster. They haven't been friends for a while now, but they have a common enemy in Andrew Jackson. So they come up with their own compromise. They will gradually lower the tariffs over a period of close to 10 years and bring it back down to the rate of 1816. That way you can still protect northern industry, but you still respect southern honor, and you show them that you're going to bring it down and not hurt them and not make them fear anything about slavery. So Henry Clay saves the day. But Jackson is furious. Jackson decides that he wants a force bill passed. What's a force bill, you might say? Well, it gives the President of the United States, in this case, Jackson, the right to use force against any state that he wants whenever he wants. Basically, Congress is just trying to make Jackson happy, make him feel like he actually won the day when it was really Clay. So for the time being, we're going to say goodbye to our good friend here, John C. Calhoun. Needless to say, he will not be Jackson's vice president in his second term of office. He's going to ask his Secretary of State, the guy I talked about earlier, Martin Van Buren, to become his new vice president. Like I say, we'll talk about Martin Van Buren in class later on. But let's look at the next big issue. That is the second bank in the United States. Southerners do not like the national bank. This infringes upon their states' rights. Jackson particularly doesn't like it. He lost money in the Panic of 1819, and he will blame the bank for that. But by this time, remember, the bus, as it's known as, the Bank of the United States, they call it the bus, becomes a source of credit and stability for the country. But it also has its things where it has foreclosed on Western farmers on their farms when they can't pay loans back. So those farmers out west hate the bank, and Jackson is their guy, so he hates the bank. Now, we had talked about this in class. The original bank, who was the charter of the original bank? Aaron. No, I'm sorry. There's a few people who are going to understand that particular inside joke, right? Air. Now, anyways, so I just know there's some people laughing right now. By the way, since we're on a second subject now, why don't we pause for a nice refreshing drink? I have my iced tea. Raspberry. So I'll go ahead and pause for a little bit and wait till you come back. Well, hello. I hope you got something nice to drink, or maybe you went and got something to eat, whatever. So let's talk again about the bank. Alexander Hamilton, right? He was the guy who created the first bank. 1791, a 20-year charter for it to exist. 1811, 20 years later, the Republican Party will not allow that bank to recharter. They let it go bye-bye. Then in 1812, you have a war. And they begin to think, you know what, we probably could have used a bank. So James Madison decides to go against Republican principle and helps to recharter a second bank in 1816. 20 years. So it's up for renewal 20 years later would be 1836. But Henry Clay, remember, he goes down in history as this schemer and plotter, which I don't think that of him. I'm sure there's others that do, but I don't. He wants to be president. So this is his second time to go up against Jackson. 1832 election. He decides he's going to make the bank an issue. He gets the president of the bank, this Nicholas Biddle. Him, Clay, and Webster both go to Biddle, and they convince him to go before Congress in 1832 and ask for a renewal charter now. The economy was doing really good. Industry is up, agriculture is up. There was already a report from Congress that stated that the National Bank is a sound bank. So let's put this out to Congress and force Jackson's hand in this, because this is an election year. Let's make the bank the election issue. That becomes Clay's idea. If Jackson signs a recharter bill in 1832, we can go to all the supporters and say, see, Jackson backstabbed you. If he vetoes it, we can go to everybody and say, see, your president is crazy. He knows nothing about the economy, and he wants to see it crash and burn. Clay believes this is his ticket to win his election. As we know, it won't happen that way. Jackson declares this bank unconstitutional. He's got too many supporters. He will veto the charter. This becomes a famous veto in our American history. In his veto message, because when a president vetoes, and we're going to talk about this, he's got to write an essay. Jackson ain't no essay writer. He's going to get a guy named Roger Taney to help him write it. We're going to talk about Roger Taney in a few moments. And basically he says that the bank is a monopoly. It's a bunch of foreign investors that take our money, and that it hurts the American people. Okay. To Clay, he thought, look, this is an attack on the American system. This is clearly showing the American people that your president doesn't understand economics. The bank veto gets printed in newspapers. Clay believes, yeah, I've got this guy now. But the American people say, wow, a monopoly has formed in America. Foreign investors are coming over. One of the things that Jackson also says is that with foreign investors, it leads to foreign influence in our democracy. A president afraid of foreign influence in our democracy. That's interesting. The people sided with Jackson, and Henry Clay is destroyed in the election of 1832. Right? Poor Clay. Well, he's got his American system, I guess, right? He's got the American system. So that, good for you, Clay. But the bank still has, 1836. So it still has 4 years to go. And they can think of something else. They can try to, figure out how to make that bank sound in 1836. Jackson probably won't run again. But Jackson and his people hate the bank. Jackson got really, really sick during the election of 32. In fact, after the election, there were some people who thought Jackson actually had died. One of which was Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren supposedly goes to the White House to visit Jackson. Jackson's in his bedroom, curtains are closed, right? It's all dark in there. And he sees Martin. He says, Martin, Martin, come close. I gotta tell you something, Martin. Martin Van Buren gets close. Jack's like, come closer. Closer, Jack. Come closer, Martin. I gotta whisper to you. Martin gets a little closer, reaches up, looks at Martin, says, the bank, Martin. The bank is trying to kill me, but I'm gonna kill it. Okay, the bank is trying to kill you? Well, let's see about that. These are our political posters or political cartoons of the time period. There's Henry Clay right there. Symptoms of a locked jaw. That's Clay on top of an old man Jackson. He's sewing his mouth shut, trying to basically censure him, say that, you know, you're old, you're feeble. He's even kind of kneeing him in the groin there a little bit. And this is also an anti-Jackson. This is King Andrew I. He's got the veto in one hand, a torn up constitution on the other hand, right? So these are Clay's people trying to put the message out, right? Make Jackson look like a dum-dum, and it's Clay who comes off as the dum-dum. Oh, Clay. And then Jackson kills the bank. He kills it dead. With the charter denied, right, the bank still, the bus was still supposed to stick around to 1836. But Jackson decides in 1833, right, after he takes his second oath of office, he's going to take out all the federal deposits in the bank. Now, so that you understand, the number one customer of the bank was the federal government. All that tariff money, tax money on whiskey and other domestic products, millions of dollars at their time period is going into that bank to support that bank. And he says, let's bleed the bus to a slow death. Well, the problem is this isn't constitutional. Only Congress can do this. So in that summer of 33, when Congress is out of session, he calls his Secretary of the Treasury to come take the money out of the bank. And the Secretary of the Treasury says, sir, that's unconstitutional. So he fires him. Appoints a new Secretary of the Treasury. Tells him, hey, I want you to take all the money out of the bank. That guy says, it's unconstitutional. He says, I'm going to give you a few days to think about it. Comes back and says, sir, no, it's still unconstitutional. He fires him, but he also then transfers this second guy to another cabinet position and then has him leave the country. A third guy finally is appointed Secretary of Treasury, Roger Taney, who I mentioned earlier. Roger Taney helped him write the bank veto. So he said, hey, Roger, why don't you now be the Secretary of Treasury? Roger's like, okay. He's like, hey, Roger, why don't you help me destroy the bank by taking all the federal money out? Okay. You know, it's unconstitutional. We might get in trouble. I don't care. And they destroy the bank. By the way, I'm not afraid to make fun of Roger Taney. Roger Taney is going to, when Jackson leaves office, he's going to appoint Roger Taney the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court with the death of John Marshall. And Roger Taney will destroy the reputation of the Supreme Court for the next 50 years because of his racism. And there's going to be the Dred Scott case we're going to talk about in class, and we're going to see that. Nicholas Biddle tries to save the bank. He's the president of the bank. He calls in all the loans from all these businessmen, and these businessmen panic, and they get on a train, and they go to Washington to see Jackson. They come into the office saying, hey, Biddle's trying to make us pay our loans. You got to do something. And Jackson's like, this isn't my problem. This is your problem. And he throws them out. So they get rid of Nicholas Biddle, but it didn't help. The bank falls apart. Jackson decides we're going to take all this federal money and we're going to put it into state banks. What he called both pet banks, state banks that are loyal to the Democratic Party, and wildcat banks. Brand new banks that are opening out in the western territories, right? That really have nothing to back anything up. They have no collateral, nothing like that to say, hey, we're a solvent bank, we can actually work. And this is going to destroy the economy. He does not run for re-election for a third term in 1836. That's going to be Martin Van Buren. And as soon as Martin Van Buren wins that election, we're going to talk about it, the country went into a massive panic in 1837. And Jackson's like, it ain't my problem. I ain't president no more. Thank you, Jackson. Thank you. So there you have it. Those are the two big issues in Jackson's first term, nullification. In his second term, you've got the bus. Nothing else really to talk about with Jackson. Nothing else that, oh, hey, what is this? That's interesting. I wonder what's going on here. Yeah, that's a good-looking guy there. I wonder where Mr. Linhart is right now. I wonder what that particular piece of machinery might be. And I wonder how this is a type of, I don't know, spoilery kind of a thing for something else that Jackson did do that we'll talk about in class. I tell you what, if anyone else can figure out what that is and let me know, maybe some extra credit or something that way. Ooh, I didn't say that. All right, everybody. Have a good evening, and I'll see everybody later. Bye-bye.